All right, well, hey, good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Just to kind of recap here, just a reminder, this is Bitcoin in Kansas City. The schedule says Bitcoin in Kansas. If you're from Missouri, you're invited to. So it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to do a little bit of talking. You're welcome to interject questions if you have them along the way. We're going to kind of start out with talking a little bit about the history, the framework of Kansas City, and how it laid the foundation of what ultimately was the idea that evolved into Bitcoin. So it's a pretty bold statement, I understand, but we have some stuff to back that up. Once we get to that, we'll go into, we've got time, we'll get into some of the current event stuff and maybe the future of what Bitcoin is doing in Kansas City and as it pertains to individuals and businesses and all sorts of things. Go ahead and do some introductions. I'll start. My name is Adam Saneka. I run a Bitcoin business in the Kansas City metro area called Hands-Free Bitcoin. We build consumer-friendly, at-home plug-and-play Bitcoin miners. We started as an educational platform in 2017, and we went on to launch our first physical product in 2018. We've been turning no-coiners into Bitcoiners ever since. So that's my background. I'm going to let these two introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce our special guest here in just a second.
Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Marquez, Kansas City native. Background really is programmer for many years, turned tech entrepreneur, turned crypto enthusiast and community builder. And right now I've got a consulting firm called Bitcoin Capital. We do some guidance on how to get people involved with Bitcoin and also some system stuff as well. But yeah, still always learning, always enjoying the ride.
Everyone, I'm Stewart. I'm Kansas City native also on the Kansas side. Sorry, people. So I was also a former technologist turned Bitcoiner. So full-time Bitcoin now. I do education and consulting services around Bitcoin, and also the co-host and organizer of our Kansas City Bitcoin Meetup. So yeah, I got some Meetup folks here today. Thanks for coming out. And anybody else that's local here, find us on meetup.com or just go to kcbitcoiners.com. You'll find our group. We meet every couple weeks here in town. So to be on the panel. And I'm going to toss it over to Andy, who is our esteemed guest today at this panel anyway. So go ahead.
My name is Andy. I live in Riverside, so just north of the river on the Missouri side, Missouri. And I run a financial planning practice called Simple Wealth Planning. Simple because you can just buy Bitcoin. I'm a certified financial planner, so I do flat fee financial planning for young families here in Kansas City. And one of the reasons why I got connected with this group is because I have a podcast called the Informed Financial Advisor Podcast, where I tell local stories that are of interest to me. And so that's kind of how I'm here today.
Yeah, so with that, we're going to have Andy kind of recap one of his podcast episodes that he did recently that kind of, like Adam mentioned at the beginning, kind of laid the groundwork here in Kansas City for some of the future ideals and policies that kind of eventually led to what Bitcoin is today. So
cool. So the thesis kind of goes like this. I'll tell you the thesis and I'll lay out the history and the story. But basically, the long and the short of it is that Bitcoin would not be here if not for a Kansas City philanthropist. That's basically the clickbait.
Any questions?
Or objections.
That's basically the clickbait title. What happened was I was driving along Volker Boulevard when there was a Volker Boulevard here in Kansas City, and I passed Volker Memorial Fountain, and I was like, who is this guy? Like, you can Google everything nowadays. And so I'm like the Wikipedia guy that wants to Wikipedia anything with local history. And I found out that, William Volker was one of the great early philanthropists in early 20th century Kansas City. So this was the early progressive era where you had the kind of patriarchs of Kansas City that were essentially the people that were making the town run before the welfare system and for the nanny state, if you will. And so William Volker most famously is basically the patriarch of UMKC. That's why they call it Volker Campus. He is one of the big donors for the Liberty Memorial, and during the course of his life, he made in today's dollars over $1 billion, and he gave away 1/3 of that money. So as I'm Googling William Volker, I noticed that he was also the founder of the Volcker Fund. I thought to myself, and I've heard of that before on the Mises.org website. The Volcker Fund is talked about from time to time as like a really important institution in like a 20th century politics, because the Volcker Fund is actually one of the reasons why Austrian economics was able to survive during a time that was very unpopular. And so the story goes like this. So William Volcker was an immigrant from Germany. He landed in Kansas City and basically started his business around the same time that Jim Pendergast started his saloon mill in West Bottom. And so if you're thinking of Kansas City history, I'm sure like the Pendergast regime is probably one of the first people you think of, right? And so think of William Volcker as being kind of like the political nemesis to the Pendergast machine, because that's really who he was. And so he started a home furnishings business, became very, very wealthy. Throughout the course of his life, he would give away a majority of his wealth through different kind of personal causes. So like a prostitute would show up and she would say, hey, I'm down on my luck, I need help. And he would, this German Christian would help out a prostitute, which I think was kind of scandalous at the time. Someone would get their bike stolen and they would show up in his office and he would give the money to the young boy for a new bike. And so stuff like that would happen in addition to these public works projects. But he became very wealthy. He gave away a large part of his wealth. And during that time, he actually invented the very first welfare system in the United States. It was right here in Kansas City. He essentially created the first welfare system in the city. And it was the model that other cities and eventually the United States adopted when they implemented a welfare system. And so, again, he was kind of an early 20th century progressive. But what started to happen is his nemesis started to butt heads with William Volcker. And that was the brother of Jim Pendergast, who was Tom Pendergast. And so Tom Pendergast, if you don't know the story, Tom Pendergast ran the town in basically the 19-teens, 1920s, and then the 1930s. And what ended up happening is William Volcker, who was starting these kind of public works projects that started as his own personal projects that eventually became kind of co-opted by the government. The government was taken over by the Pendergast regime, and so essentially they're now running the William Volcker public works projects. And that made William Volcker start to change his mind about the relevance and the contributions that he was making towards these public works projects. And he has a quote, something to the effect of like, I decided that it was better to just give money privately and to individuals as opposed to funding public works. And so towards the end of his life, he had a change of heart. One of the reasons why that happened was through the influence of his nephew, Harold Luna, who became very, very important in Austrian economics, and through the reading of the book by Hayek called Road to Serfdom, which I think came out in 1940s or something like that.
He says the
who's that?
The gentleman.
Okay, yeah, so William Volcker,
It's
Harold Luna is the nephew of William Volcker. And so if you listen to my podcast, I had a chance to interview the granddaughter of Lunau, and so this would be the great niece of William Volcker. She's still living, she knows the whole story.
Thank you.
She's a very successful, wonderful woman in her own right. Back in the day, she used to spend her summers at Roselawn in Kansas City. So if you're ever driven through the Volcker neighborhood, the old Volcker estate is still there. And I actually had a chance to meet the fella who owns, a doctor here in town, who owns the estate. It's a beautiful building that was built in the 1890s in the Volcker neighborhood, which is a few blocks from Kansas Medical Center. And so how does this relate to Bitcoin? Okay, so towards the end of his life, he starts to have a change of thought on how to basically give away all this money that he knows he wants to give away. So he funds UMKC Volcker Campus with what today would be hundreds of millions of dollars, and the rest of his money, about $15 million, which in today's dollars is well over $100 million, he starts the William Volcker Fund. It's basically an early think tank, and after he dies, his nephew, Harold Lunau, kind of controversially here in Kansas City, a lot of people in Kansas City did not think well of this person. because he starts to take the funding away from Kansas City, he starts to support individual Austrian economists. So men like Ludwig von Mises, who was an Austrian Jew who fled during World War II, ends up in the United States totally penniless because he didn't have Bitcoin. and he starts to try to find a job. He can't find anything in academia here in the US because during this time, the idea of preaching sound money principles is incredibly unpopular in the mid-20th century. So if you think about it, I mean, this is like the era of Harry Truman. This is the era of FDR. So even if you're kind of like on the right wing at that time, you're still more of a populist. You're not a sound money enthusiast. And so this, some of these weirdos like the Harold Lunows of the world, most notably him, were like, we're going to support Mises, we're going to support F.A. Hayek, and then later on, we're going to take Murray Rothbard onto our payroll to work for the Volcker Fund because nobody would hire these guys. And the arrangement was something like this. The Volcker Fund would go to like New York University and they would say, hey, we know you're not going to hire this guy. Let him teach here as an unpaid professor and we will pay his salary. And so that's what the Volcker Fund did for decades. And so the story goes like this. These Austrian economists gained new relevance. They ended up influencing people like Ron Paul, even some of the people on like the Reagan staff, for example, became very influenced by Austrian economics. But it's kind of died here or there, right? But what's interesting is today the Austrians have kind of newfound relevance because with Bitcoin, it seems like there actually is an invention to make these sound money principles a reality. And so now you're starting to see, you know, the Pierre Rochards of the world, and the Nakamoto Institute, and the Safety Namuses, and the Stefan Leveras, and the Vijay Boyapatis talk about Mises, Rothbard, F.A. Hayek, all men whose careers were basically made possible by the Volcker Fund. And so I mentioned the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. Basically, they kind of gave me the courage to kind of make this case, because if you look at their website, this is a group that made kind of early an Austrian case for Bitcoin. Their website kind of has all of the founding documents, the authors, the people that were like in the decades prior to Satoshi laying the foundation for Satoshi. So it's people like Nick Szabo, Ralph Merkel, Hal Finney, all these kind of cypherpunks, right? But it also has the Austrians. And so Karl Menger, who was the early Austrian, and then of course the men I just mentioned who are connected with Volcker, Mises and Hayek and Rothbard, are also listed on this Satoshi Nakamoto Institute website. I'm sure some of you see his website, right? And so that's kind of why I give Volcker a lot of credit. And so I DM'd Jeff Dietz, who today is the president of the Mises Institute, right? Who's basically the institute that's keeping the work of Mises alive today. And I'm like, okay, I've got this thesis. It's that Bitcoin wouldn't be here without William Volcker of Kansas City, because the Volcker Fund kept the work of Mises alive. He's like, yeah, honestly, there was not a lot going on back then, and he deserves a lot of credit. And so that's kind of the long and the short of it. I'll end the story with this kind of funny anecdote. Kind of funny, however you want to think of it. Towards the end of Harold Lunau's life, again, Lunau was a Kansas Cityan, he battled Pendergrass, the nephew of William Volcker, essentially the protege of William Volcker. Towards the end of his life, in the 1970s, he started to kind of lose his mind. And when I interviewed his granddaughter, she herself thought that he was kind of not himself towards the end of his life. And it was one of the reasons for the breakup of the Volcker Fund, which essentially became the Institute at Stanford. And one of the things that happened is he was a Christian of some sorts, and he thought he was having revelations that God was telling him that he was going to be able to take down worldwide communism. And everyone thought he was nuts. I mean, even when I spoke with his granddaughter, she thought he was a little wacko. And so I take her story at face value. If that's what the people closest to him thought, I think that's fine. But maybe he was right. Maybe this Kansas City man did have the ability to take down worldwide communism, if not indirectly through this invention of Bitcoin, which he helped keep afloat through the sound money principles of Mises and many others. So I don't know how much time I took there, but that's, in a nutshell, that's the story. So Harold Luno, William Volcker, two men that kept Austrian economics alive, which is one of the reasons why we have Bitcoin today, and we wouldn't be here without Kansas City. So there you go.
Beautiful. Can I ask a question? You used the term, you said Lucius mind?
Say it again?
Lucius mind?
He was kind of losing his mind.
Oh, he was kind of losing his
mind.
mind.
I thought you were naming a company.
So if you read the history of the
and I was wondering with what you were talking about, so losing his mind.
If you read the history of the Volcker Fund, they split because one of the reasons why Luna was kind of saying things like this, and the other people in the room were like, I think it was nuts. Right?
I mean, but sound money was the core of everything that we had back then at that time. You're only talking about the academic fighting about economic ideologies. You're not talking about the reality of what, because we had sound money with the gold backing the dollar. So, I mean, am I correct?
Well, this was a debate that was happening in the 40s.
So you're talking about academic debates and the
even like Warren Buffett's father, Howard Buffett, for example, he was a hard money guy, and so when Howard Buffett saw FDR with the New Deal and doing all this spending and essentially going, stealing everyone's gold, Howard Buffett's like, this is crazy. And so this is one of the reasons why Warren Buffett and Howard Buffett were at odds with each other, because Warren Buffett's like, I'm not going to own gold, whereas Howard Buffett was like, the bug. And so these debates were happening back then.
And now the greater one was sound money.
Correct.
Now you made it sound like it wasn't. It was like this small little thing of sound money that brought in sound money. It's already the foundation.
So Austrian economics encompasses more than just the hard money aspects. So the Austrians also believed in no government control over anything. So there's a lot more there than just the hard money part of it.
More of
Yeah, we got next.
So from like the popular telling of the fall of the Volcker Fund, one of the things that's normally highlighted is the fact that they started to align themselves with controversial figures. One of whom kind of like took the other side of World War II and sort of made advocacy for fascism. Is that acknowledged within Austrian circles at all?
Who are you referring to?
I can't remember the name, I'm sorry. But there were at least one or two controversial intellectuals that I don't know if they were brought into the Volcker, think tank funding type thing, but they were saying rather controversial things at the time.
Yeah, so when I talk about the kind of three of the pivotal players in the Austrian case for Bitcoin, those are three of the people that were associated with the Volcker Fund. But the Volcker Fund touched a lot of people, and so it touched Milton Friedman, right, who's pretty mainstream. And I'm not exactly who all they encompassed, but yeah, you're right. They were controversial and here in Kansas City is maybe not so well thought of. I'm not sure who you're referring to.
I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah.
So we kind of want to transition from the history to kind of the current state of Bitcoin adoption and kind of, Bitcoin being more recognized here in Kansas City specifically. So kind of a few things to touch on there is if you go out to different restaurants, shops, things like that, you might start noticing that more and more companies around the city are starting to accept Bitcoin for payment for certain things, which is really cool to see. And then you're also starting to see some companies integrate Bitcoin as far as a balance sheet asset. So, just like we as individuals buy Bitcoin to store our value, more and more companies are starting to realize to do the same thing for their businesses. So, starting to see some business around Kansas City do that. It's usually smaller private companies that aren't necessarily in the S&P 500 or anything like that. But it's starting to happen, so that's really cool to see. And then the third thing, it just has to do with the community aspect of Bitcoin. So if you all heard the community discussion earlier today with Warren, kind of everybody that's been in the Bitcoin space for a while always comes away just saying how positive the community is. It's just kind of a fun place to be around because people are excited for the future. They want to fix things that they think are wrong with the system as opposed to just kind of always wanting someone else to tackle problems for them, which unfortunately a lot of people today kind of fit in that mold of things. So the Kansas City Bitcoin Meetup is really what we're trying to do here to foster that community here, specifically locally. So we'd love to see you all there, like I mentioned, but one outpouring of that meetup is we're actually starting to work with other companies and businesses around town to help answer questions related to Bitcoin, help get merchant adoption continuing to increase. So it's really great to see, and hopefully that will just be more mainstream the further time goes along. I wanted to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about startups. So he's deep in the startup scene here in Kansas City.
Yeah, I mean, and another aspect to the, expansion of Bitcoin in KC, I was talking to Chris, is like the number of ATMs you're seeing. He was driving down Truce and he saw signs for Bitcoin ATM, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a bit of my background is I've been part of the startup community here in KC for over a decade now, back in its nascent beginnings. You guys obviously know when Google Fiber chose Kansas City to bring their service here, and that really helped launch Kansas City's startup community into its next iteration. And lots of cool things there. And truth be told, a week ago I had a full head of hair, beautiful head of hair. And when we were talking about hey, let's find out what the startups are doing with Bitcoin here in KC, I pulled it all out because I couldn't find really any startups that were doing anything really specific with Bitcoin. There's a lot of blockchain startups here in KC and doing really cool stuff there, but Bitcoin specific I was struggling to find. And honestly, it was a little disheartening because harkening back to when Google came to KC, and it really thrust us into the limelight of the startup, nation that is America. We had a real opportunity to say, hey, Kansas City's here. We've got Google Fiber. Let's see what we can, invent on it. Let's see what we can create on it to really, put a flagpole into the ground. And nothing really ever came from it. It was like a window open and a window closed. So I would really love to see Kansas City put a pole in the ground for some sort of Bitcoin interaction or activity. You look at obviously San Francisco, you look at New York, you look at Miami. They're doing really cool things, but I think it's going to take the community, all of us, to say, hey, we want this.
Like what? What cool things are they doing?
Well, I mean, look at Mayor Suarez, right, in Miami. He's literally hearkening out via Twitter and everything, saying, come to Miami. We are Bitcoin friendly. Wyoming as a state is doing the same thing. And it's going to take that political level to do that. So I continuously tweeted Mayor Q to say, why don't you take your salary, right, in Bitcoin, like some of these other mayors, and what can we do to put Kansas City on the map? He never responds. And he knows who I am, but I think he just doesn't want to touch that. He's got more priority. But I would love for us to see that, and I think going to these meetups and just putting ideas out there, like I've got this Bitcoin art idea that I kind of want to get off the ground, but anything that you guys have, and maybe you guys out there know of something, because I literally reached out to contacts and said, what are you doing, or who do you know what's doing, and I got nothing. So, yeah.
Do some of the businesses, the startup companies that you work with, do they have good access to investor capital? Is that a major hurdle?
That was a huge hurdle back in the day, but it's gotten much better.
Really?
Now there's funds based in KC, there's funds remote that are investing into KC startups, so I think access to capital is not as big an issue as it was.
Okay.
Yeah, I come from an asphalt company here in Kansas City. I've been here since '93. Started with my dad. And what I'm wanting to do is start accepting Bitcoin for driveways, parking lots, that sort of thing. But because it's so new, there are other people in the company and the manager and stuff like that. They're like, oh, they don't know anything about Bitcoin up and so it's a bad idea. But I really want to do that. So I don't know if that's something. Is it still early to where I have an option to where I can accept Bitcoin for payment, or even use it to pay other companies out here. I feel like that would be so much easier.
So I can speak kind of just as a business owner myself. Incorporating Bitcoin into any business is actually pretty easy. With all the tools that are out there, there are a lot of really dedicated developers that are just driven to develop tools, and they do it from a philanthropic perspective. We accept Bitcoin as payment, and transparently, we don't get a ton, but there are Bitcoiners out there who want to, exclusively transact in Bitcoin. And so
The car dealer that accepted Bitcoin got my business this year.
see, there we go.
Who is that?
Yeah, who was that?
San Diego,
Okay.
shipped it,
No one
$800.
local. Okay. Yeah, my point is, there are some really easy things that you can do as a business owner, but also, as an employee. If you're an employee and you think Bitcoin's cool enough, maybe talk to your employer and see if they'll pay you in Bitcoin. It's really not that hard to do, and it can attract some new talent, some people entering the workforce. If you just look at the generational kind of qualities of these different demographics, people around my age are increasingly more interested in this Bitcoin thing, and they're just seeing all these headlines in the news about all the printing and everything, and they're really looking for an escape. And just being an option, having that as an option, it doesn't really cost you anything except maybe finding an accountant or a tax professional that can help you track all that.
I mean, interrupt a bit more.
Yeah.
I want to that real quick. Because it's so new to a lot of people and they don't know much about it. Is there any way, whether I talk to one of you guys, if you guys are a person that I can actually come out to my office? Because I'm not tech savvy at all. I mean, I've been a Bitcoin for a year and a half now. I'm a firm believer on everything about it. But I need kind of somebody to come in and guide me, say, hey, here's what we're going to do, to where I can get a reoccurring transaction, say, here's how much money I'm putting in a month, I'm going to do $5 grand a month or whatever, and that's what I'm going to do, and then also accept it and have somebody kind of just line me out and get going on it if it does.
Yeah, so there's a couple people here today that run consulting companies around Bitcoin stuff, so we'd be happy to help you out with that. I have one, a couple other guys here who do that as well, but I would also say, just real quick, come out to the meetup. I mean, this is all the stuff we talked about there. People are more than willing to go out their way to help people, for free, so. Yeah.
And just to expand, real quick, I think it's safe to say that Bitcoin is a movement, right? I think we're all part of this movement, this change. And to me, when you buy into it, you are inherently becoming an advocate for it. You are now responsible for carrying the torch, carrying the flag, and to share it out there. So, with you, it's like you understand it, but a lot of your customers don't. So, in a way, please share with them, and as you get more knowledge, you're bringing them into it, and you're just doing part of what we're all doing.
I sound like a psycho-religious person.
Yeah, it's tough.
You guys don't get it. I'm trying to explain.
Someday you'll be revered then.
Just as a benefit for everyone, I mean, the simplicity of someone coming to buy something with Bitcoin is just another, like for instance, if I'm going to use Visa credit card or I'm going to use something else, they can transact that and it goes directly from the Bitcoin that they're paying with into cash, and then the business gets cash, or the other way around. They pay with a credit card, it turns it into Bitcoin. So just that transaction piece allows someone to participate, and you're not really changing that much, just another transaction, and it's very simple. So that's what happened with the first, my cousin actually was one of the first people accepting for a car in Kansas City, and that was all it was, just a transaction, and it went right to cash.
You can also offer a discount. You pay a Bitcoin discount, you're getting an appreciating asset, and they're getting a discount.
We'll go to you in a second, Todd. Did you want to finish up your?
Yeah, so I was just gonna say a big part of it is also education, right? So if you listen to a podcast, read a book, recommend those things to people that that might be interested. It goes a long way to, because it is scary when you're new, right? To learn what it is, figure it out. But the more education you get,
I thought it was dumb when I first.
yeah, exactly, right. So that was it. Question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were talking about people in Kansas City doing big business, but I feel like one of the big bottlenecks that we're having right now is this, will we ever see NFTs on blockchain? Like, I think there's a lot to be done in business with NFTs. I mean, obviously they want to become Bitcoin, but all the attention is on the NFTs right now. And so I think there's a lot being done there, but it's not, I think that we're talking about, we've seen a lot of on these things, it's not quite Bitcoin centric.
But I think you can speak to this because, obviously NFTs, smart contracts, so we need smart contracts running on the Bitcoin.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's some.
Yeah. So the cool thing about Bitcoin is it builds in layers, so that that sound money base is always there, and anything do, if it proves to have a use case that people find valuable, will eventually make its way to Bitcoin. So smart contracts.
So you think
Yeah.
NFTs will make its way?
Well, they
actually
already
are. NFTs
They already are.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Rare Pepes?
So
Yeah, Rare Pepes were like 2015, 2014.
I had no idea.
They were the first like collectible kind of like card of people's own personal illustrations of Pepe.
They're pro.
Right, exactly. They proved that they earned Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then they would have another virtual blockchain on which they could track their assets.
So long story short, smart contract scripting language is now being built on Bitcoin, which will enable a lot of these functions that other coins have today. And that'll be coming later this year when Taproot, which is an upgrade to the Bitcoin network, goes into effect later this month. So.
Can you talk a little bit about your meetup and like how do you structure it? How do you organize? Who's in charge of it? What do you do? How do you decide like do you teach things? Do you discuss things? Do you promote things? What is how do you
Yeah. So this will be a good example of kind of the decentralized network at work in this case. So there's a random group of us who kind of all came together with just wanting to talk about Bitcoin and decided to formalize that into the Meetup group. But who does what when is there's no set duty for each person. It kind of changes week to week, meetup to meetup, and it's really just whoever wants to contribute is welcome to. So there's a few of us who schedule the meetups and pick the restaurant or the bar or whatever. But other than that, it's kind of everybody can help if they want to. When we first started, we were doing just purely socialization at like a bar or a restaurant, so we didn't have a set agenda or topics or presentations or anything like that. As we've grown and we're starting to have a lot of people brand new to Bitcoin show up, which is awesome, by the way. We love that. We're starting to do more formalized presentations, like a Bitcoin 101 type of presentation, Lightning Network presentations, things like that. But the idea is kind of try to alternate between social and then more structured meetups. That way people can get best of both worlds.
So it's an organic growth model.
Exactly.
Do you feel like do you have to push it, or is it is it taking on its own?
So it's definitely taking on life of its own. We do zero marketing. We don't have a Facebook group or a Twitter account for it or anything. It's just basically purely word of mouth. And yeah, we started. I think the first meetup 6 or 7 months ago. We had 5 or 6 people show up, and now our group is over 120 people. And not all of those come every time, but we're starting to get 30, 40 people at a meetup. So it's been fun to see grow. And if anybody here is a fan of whiskey, we're going to go tour J. Rieger Distillery here in a few weeks. Because that'll be fun to do a tour and a tasting, and they're interested in accepting Bitcoin as payment, so we're going to help them get set up for that. So that'll be cool.
Yeah, well, in my mind, for the average consumer, it seems like there are 2 hurdles in Bitcoin. One is the volatility of the market, the highs and lows that we've seen and experienced. Although if you're long-term bullish on it, you know that it's going to appreciate no matter what. But yet, if you have a small family who's invested at the peak, like this spring they invested maybe at 60K or something, and then they saw it this summer go back down to 30K, and then they tell your friend who told them to invest in it, I just lost half my money right there. So how do we encourage people to engage in a market that we see so much volatility in, but also just for the average consumer who's going to a Bitcoin ATM, there's such high slippers as well. So it's how do you get over that hurdle of encouraging people to engage in Bitcoin when they're just I spent $1,400, but $400 of that went to fees. So how are we engaging people to invest and then recirculate Bitcoin into some of the startups and the investments if it's such a high hurdle to get into? What are some of the recommendations you guys would offer to getting into the market and then becoming a believer in an aggregate of stocks?
Yeah, I'll take the question. I would say that the answer to that question is going to be different depending on who you're asking it to and who it's directed to.
I'm talking about maybe the average person.
Yeah, totally get that. The problem is we're living in unprecedented times right now with unprecedented technology and unprecedented network effect. We don't really have the visibility to see what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Literally. But over time, the fog, I guess you could say, kind of starts to dissipate. You can kind of see the trends based on what's actually happened in real history. And so when you're talking about the economics, how many dollars is Bitcoin worth, which I think is kind of where the root of your question is. There is historical precedent in what happens in these types of environments, so I would direct you that way. But when I'm talking with people and they're asking me for my advice, I always shill them education, right? I don't ever encourage anyone to buy anything or sell anything until they understand what they're doing.
Sure.
And so I think that is the most important aspect of any investment of your time and your energy, is to understand what it is you're investing your time and your energy into. And if that's the US dollar, understand more about the US dollar, right? And I'll be the first to admit, I didn't know hardly anything about not just the US dollar or fiat in general, but more generally speaking, like life. Like I learned about how a lot of things work because of Bitcoin. It opened my eyes to all these different broken systems. So I think if you're approaching it through the lens of wanting to grow and learn and actually understand something, you're going to come to your own conclusion. And I think everybody needs to do that themselves.
Like a real quick building on a specific, so like dollar cost averaging is always a great way for people to get involved instead of just buying, however much you want to put into it right up front. There's some cool apps out there like Swan Bitcoin, the sponsor of today, that let you set up auto dollar cost averaging.
Is that Swan?
Yep, SWAN.com, yeah. So you can set up weekly buys, daily buys, monthly buys, whatever you want to do. And once you set that up, you put in the amount and the frequency, and they just automatically do it for you. And the cool thing about them is you can also withdraw that Bitcoin to your own self-custody wallet. So that's one good way for people to get involved and not deal with volatility as much. So, yeah.
Just a second, I'm going to add to Don's point, and then we got you, and then another question over here. But you mentioned Swan. So Swan is a sponsor of the event. I'm very thankful for that. The CEO of Swan, his name is Corey Clifton, and one of the things that he says, which is really some concrete advice that might help answer that question that you asked, is he always advises to buy as much Bitcoin as you can afford to never have to sell. That's kind of his line, I believe. So I totally agree with that.
Pull up the ATM as often as you can.
I do kind of personally have my own take on that. I think it's important to participate in the Bitcoin economy. So kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, if you're going to buy something anyway, go find a Bitcoiner that sells it and go pay them in Bitcoin, and then just replenish your stack, right? Take care of obviously pay your taxes, make sure you're accounting for all that. But there are ways that you can do that without having to pay any taxes with apps like Strike. And you can actually buy the dollars at spot and send them Bitcoin through their wallet, and you don't incur the capital gains event because you're just buying those dollars and replenishing them all in one transaction.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we got that.
Well, I was just going to add to that a little bit. Tell me if I'm wrong here. Like, I don't really look at Bitcoin as like an investment like I do with stock. In my mind, it's my savings account type of deal. And the reason why I finally jumped into it, okay, well, where do you put your money? That's the main question. What am I going to do with my savings money? And I don't know what the inflation rate is exactly, depending on if you're talking consumer goods or real estate or whatever. But I'm told it's north of 20% possibly. And with stock market, you get a return of 7-8% on average. So I'm going to think in my mind, okay, well, where do you put your money? And Bitcoin, since it's been here, has been what, 130, 200% a year, the average roughly. And to me, nothing beats that. So that's kind of what I normally, tell people. I'm not trying to sell.
So this is a great jumping on point here. He just told something that is not in the mainstream media.
Right.
And so I think even though these technical hurdles, which are very important, our greatest hurdle is this information from the bankers, from those that are entrenched. That is our greatest. So getting together locally, I believe that locally that's the only way to really overcome that, because people, if you're person to person and you say, hey, I did this and I did this over here, and you got 3 or 4 businesses, that's the greatest focus for Kansas City, is to have real people getting together and doing real things. And as soon as we beat and we learn that, oh, yeah, there's this drop right here, but if you look at the whole chart, it's like going straight up like that, and you're like, oh, wait, they don't ever show that.
That's what I was going to say. Zoom out. Like anytime somebody like, show them plan B, and you're like, oh, okay, I see the stuff. Okay, it's making sense.
So it's a safer bet in the long term.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah.
To wrap up on your question about savings and kind of tying that into what you were talking about with your business, one easy thing that any business owner can do is not just transact, buy, sell, or buy and hold, or I'm sorry, buy Bitcoin, accept Bitcoin, pay employees in Bitcoin, but more importantly, I think, is saving in Bitcoin. And that's my personal philosophy. Any business owner can, well, not any business owner easily, but in my experience, depending on how your business is structured, it can be just as easy to hold Bitcoin in a treasury with your business as it is with a person. Now, there is some ambiguity there depending on how your business is structured, but I have an LLC. I'm not a tax professional or anything like that, but as I my business, buying and holding Bitcoin in my business's treasury has been completely painless, especially if you never sell it.
And just real quick, Andy's podcast, he had a great episode I was listening to the other day, where he talks about, as Michael said, talk about the parable of the Argentinian farmer. So listen to that episode. I don't know what number it is, you can talk about it. But
We need the Kansas City version of Michael Saylor.
Yeah.
Who is the Kansas City corporate heavyweight that's going to come out and be our?
It's gonna be
you.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Laser eyes, baby.
All right, we had a question on that.
Mostly it was pertaining to decentralized autonomous organizations. Do we have any DAOs that?
Yeah, it's called Bitcoin.
Are there any corporate structures in Kansas City that are looking more towards decentralizing something like Shapeshift or?
Not that I'm aware of. No. I think our meetup would be the closest thing that would qualify for that.
So I'll just say that I was talking with a gentleman, I don't know if you got involved with his presentation on the other side, Professor Del Wright. He was talking about some of the hurdles involved with the legal aspect of businesses transitioning into a DAO. So he's probably a good person to talk to about that.
Are most of your members using the Kansas City area?
So most are here locally in Kansas City. We have people come from as far away as Topeka and Lawrence come out too.
Basically,
cool to see.
Topeka to Columbia.
Yep. Yep.
But Paige here is from Detroit. She's going to start attending.
Yep. Yeah. Highly recommend if your city doesn't have a meetup, start one. See who shows up. You'd be surprised. So, yeah.
Any tips for anyone who wants to start a meetup who doesn't live in Kansas City? Like, how would you go about building that?
Good question. So,
Reach out to an existing meetup.
Yeah,
ask them how they did it.
That's a lot of meetups are on Twitter. People that run up things, they're very responsive. If you don't live on Bitcoin Twitter all day like we do, you just want to go to meetup.com. It seems to be the most popular website to use to create your group, schedule it, schedule your meetups, pick the locations, and then people can sign up to be members of your group, and they'll automatically get notified when you post a new event, things like that. And then other than that, I mean, some people have Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups that they use to kind of advertise their meetup. So those are some suggestions.
Fluffy blackjack in the back.
Yeah, Don, you mentioned that there's a lot more businesses in Kansas City that are accepting it or holding it on their balance sheet. I think that we need to do a better job as the KC Bitcoin community of supporting it. So if there is some sort of resource that already exists, like if you or Mitch or whoever is speaking with those businesses and they are willing to dox themselves, I guess, and say that they are holding Bitcoin, I think everyone would really benefit from that.
We need a directory.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Hey, on that note, if you are a business owner in this room and you'd like some notoriety, let us know. We'd be happy to support you.
Yeah, we want to know if anybody here has a business that accepts Bitcoin.
If you're comfortable answering that question.
Sure.
I see hands in the back.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. What's your business?
I manage media assets in the blockchain industry.
Okay.
Bad Crypto Podcast, Nifty Show, that media.
Okay.
So it's different because we usually get paid.
Yeah.
Joel and Travis.
Very cool. That's awesome. Let's see, I think we have time for one more question, maybe.
Well, not a business owner, but Taylor here.
I spoke earlier, previous one, running for Congress, but we accept Bitcoin in my campaign too. So we're leading the field in the 4th district.
In Missouri.
In Missouri. Crypto's been an area that I've been involved with for a few years now. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. One more question if we have one.
Just your guys' opinion real quick. I heard that a lot of institutions are wanting to jump into Bitcoin, but they're kind of on the fence, waiting for regulators to kind of regulate how they want. In your guys' opinion, if they jump to the regulations and regulate what they want, do you think lot of institutions that are ready to dive into this and start putting, buy Bitcoin.
The institutions are buying every day right now.
Well, yeah, I know a lot of them have, but the reason why it hasn't been the big
Let me say this. So Michael Saylor did a how do corporations get involved in it. It's a good series, right? And on it he had a guest, I'm not going to remember his name, but he dropped some knowledge about institutions that he's talking with. He didn't say names, but he was very confident in saying there's a lot of money on the side. I don't know if you have something.
I was just going to say yes. To the point about adoption, to me, like, adoption is just happening. Like, you just look at the network effect of this thing. Like, how many people here were just orange pilled by their buddy? Like, that's just going to keep happening. And the next wave is going to be the institutions after Michael Saylor. But that's kind of why I alluded to the fact that we need the Kansas City institutions to get involved.
And also, don't be fooled, there's a lot of big players, JP Morgan, they got their own cryptocurrency. They said that, we've got a cryptocurrency test that was put together, but they've had it for many years. So they're playing the game. The same thing in the stock market. You've got all this media and saying all these things, but they're doing something else on the side.
To wrap this up real quick, 1 minute left, we just kind of want to paint the picture of the future for Kansas City and Bitcoin. So, the number going up as far as the price is cool, but there's a lot more to it than that. So really, it's, we want to paint the picture for a healthier Kansas City, more technologically forward Kansas City, and one that will flourish under the coming hard money system that's coming back finally after being gone for 100 years. So thanks for coming out.
Wait, real quick, when's the next meetup? Is that
Tuesday night.
That's Tuesday.
Yeah, coming up. So it'll be at, where are we doing?
KCBitcoiners.com.
LC's downtown. LC's, yeah.
That's all we hear.